You finish the day, close the laptop, and sit there for a moment. You were busy. You were genuinely busy. Emails, meetings, tasks, messages, more emails. And yet, somewhere underneath all of that, there is this quiet, almost confusing feeling that you didn't actually do anything. Not laziness, not a lack of effort. You moved constantly. You just don't feel like it added up to something. That feeling is not a personal failure. It's actually a signal worth understanding. This experience is more common than people admit. Most people who feel this way assume something is wrong with them, that they need better habits, a better morning routine, more discipline. But the feeling itself is pointing to something much more specific than a character flaw. It's pointing to how the brain actually tracks and registers meaningful work, and how easy it is to be genuinely active all day without ever triggering that internal sense of progress. The common explanation most people reach for is that they were distracted, or that they wasted time, or that they weren't focused enough. And sometimes that's partly true, but that explanation misses something important. Because the feeling of emptiness at the end of a busy day doesn't only happen to distracted people. It happens to people who were highly focused, who answered every message, who sat in every meeting, who completed every item on the list. The problem isn't attention, it's something deeper. Research in behavioral psychology and cognitive science suggests that the brain does not experience all effort as equal. There is a meaningful difference between what researchers broadly describe as effortful activity and what the brain internally registers as progress. These two things can look identical from the outside. They can feel similar in the moment, but they produce very different outcomes in terms of how satisfied and complete a person feels at the end of the day. The brain is particularly sensitive to something called task closure. When a task has a clear beginning, a clear end, and a visible result, the brain processes it as completed. This completion triggers a small but real sense of resolution. Over the course of a day, those small moments of resolution accumulate into something that feels like accomplishment. When they're absent, no matter how busy you were, that feeling doesn't arrive. The problem with modern work, especially desk work, office work, and knowledge work, is that most of it is structured in a way that makes closure nearly impossible. Emails don't end. Meetings produce more meetings. Slack messages arrive before you've finished responding to the previous ones. Projects stretch across weeks with no clear moment where you look at something and feel it is genuinely finished. The work is real, but the brain never gets the signal that anything resolved. Think about a typical office morning. You start with a meeting that produces a follow-up action item. You break to answer emails, but 3 more arrive while you're writing. You return to a document, edit it, and send it for review. Nothing there is finished. Everything is mid-process, mid-air, waiting for something else. By noon, you've been working solidly, but you haven't completed anything in the way the brain registers completion. Afternoons are often worse. Decision fatigue begins to compound. Research consistently shows that the quality of decisions and the ability to decisions-focused engagement both decline as the day progresses. So not only are you entering a part of the day where closure becomes harder to achieve, you're also doing so with reduced cognitive resources. You're more reactive, more likely to fill time with low-effort tasks that feel productive but require very little real processing. This is where reactive work becomes important to understand. Responding to messages, attending meetings, approving things, scrolling through updates. These activities feel like work because they are work. They require time, attention, and presence. But they are largely defined by other people's agendas and rhythms. The brain processes them as responses, not as initiated, directed, meaningful output. There's a difference between doing something because you chose to pursue it and doing something because something else demanded a response. Both take time. Only one registers as progress. There's also a phenomenon that researchers refer to informally as pseudo-productivity, the experience of appearing and feeling busy without moving meaningfully toward anything significant. This isn't about wasting time in the obvious sense. It's about filling the structure of a working day with activity that has the texture of productivity without its substance. Reorganizing a folder, reading an article you'll never use, attending a meeting where your presence wasn't actually necessary. None of it is laziness. All of it fills the hours. The uncomfortable truth, and it is uncomfortable, is that busyness can actually function as a substitute for accomplishment, rather than a path toward it. When we are very busy, the brain is occupied, stimulated, and activated. That activation can feel meaningful in the moment. It's only afterward, in the quiet, that the absence of real progress becomes noticeable. By then, the day is over, and the instinct is to assume the problem was personal rather than structural. What makes this harder to see is that busy people often look successful from the outside. They're always in meetings, always responding, always on. There's social signaling embedded in busyness. Research in social psychology has found that appearing busy is associated in many cultures with importance, dedication, and high status. So not only does busyness feel like productivity from the inside, it also reads as productivity from the outside. Both pressures push people further into activity without ever questioning whether that activity is producing the right internal outcome. It's important to say clearly what this does not mean. It does not mean that responding to emails is a waste. It does not mean that meetings have no value, or that reactive work is beneath you, or that you should only do tasks that feel personally meaningful. Modern work requires a significant amount of coordination, communication, and administrative function. None of that is going away. The point is not to judge those activities, but to understand why they don't produce the same internal feeling as other kinds of work. Understanding a pattern doesn't mean the pattern is wrong. It means you see it more clearly. This also does not mean that people who feel this way are secretly unproductive. Many of the most objectively productive people in demanding careers experience this feeling regularly. Output can be high, results can be real, and the feeling of accomplishment can still be absent. Those things are not contradictions. They reflect the gap between external measurement and internal experience, and the fact that the brain's satisfaction system doesn't care about your performance metrics. At the end of a busy day, when that hollow feeling arrives, it's not telling you that you failed. It's telling you something much more specific. It's telling you that the brain didn't get enough of what it recognizes as meaningful closure. That's a perceptual and structural reality, not a moral one. The day happened. The work was real. The brain just didn't file it the way it files progress. That quiet feeling at the end of the day is actually useful information. It's not a reason to be harder on yourself, and it's not evidence of a flaw in your character or your work ethic. It's a remarkably consistent signal that something about how the day was organized didn't match what the brain needs to feel like. The time was well spent. Most people dismiss that signal. They assume tomorrow will feel different. Sometimes it does. Often it doesn't for exactly the same reasons. The pattern continues not because the person isn't trying, but because the signal was never examined closely enough to be understood.